The morning sun cast long shadows across the Naval Special Warfare Command training facility in Coronado, California. Lieutenant Commander Saracen stepped out of her rental car, her civilian clothes drawing curious glances from the uniformed personnel moving between buildings. At 5 feet 4 inches tall with an athletic build, she looked young for her 32 years. Her black hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she carried only a small backpack and a manila folder. Sarah had specifically chosen casual attire for her first day as the new SEAL training evaluator. Jeans, running shoes, and a plain navy blue polo shirt made her blend in with the support staff and civilian contractors who worked on base. This was intentional. She wanted to observe the training program without the automatic deference that came with her rank and position. As she walked toward the main administrative building, Sarah reflected on the unusual path that had brought her here. Few people knew that she had completed the grueling selection and assessment phase of Delta Force training before transferring to naval intelligence. Even fewer knew about her specialized training in psychological operations and her doctorate in military psychology. The Navy had handpicked her for this evaluation role because they needed someone who understood both the physical and mental demands of elite special operations. The SEAL training program was under scrutiny. Recent concerns about training methods, instructor conduct, and the psychological preparation of candidates had prompted a comprehensive review. Sarah's job was to spend 6 months embedded with various training classes, observing everything from basic conditioning to advanced tactical exercises. Her final report would influence policy changes that could affect SEAL training for decades. Inside the administrative building, Sarah approached the reception desk where a petty officer was sorting through paperwork. The young man looked up with a polite but slightly dismissive expression. "Can I help you, ma'am?" "I'm here to see Commander Rodriguez about the training evaluation project," Sarah said, keeping her voice neutral. The petty officer glanced at her civilian clothes again. "Are you the new administrative assistant?" Commander Rodriguez mentioned someone would be starting today to help with the paperwork. Sarah almost smiled at the assumption but simply nodded. "Something like that. Could you point me in the right direction?" "3rd floor, room 312. The elevator is around the corner." As Sarah made her way upstairs, she noted how easily she had been categorized and dismissed. This was exactly the reaction she had hoped for. If the training staff saw her as just another administrative worker, they would behave naturally around her. She would get an unfiltered look at how the program really operated. Commander Miguel Rodriguez was a compact man with graying temples and the weathered look of someone who had spent decades in special operations. When Sarah knocked on his office door, he looked up from a stack of training reports with tired eyes. "You must be the evaluation specialist," he said, rising from his chair. "I have to admit, when they told me they were sending someone to observe our program, I was expecting someone older? Someone male? Someone in uniform?" Sarah finished with a slight smile. Rodriguez had the grace to look embarrassed. "Well, yes. Your credentials are impressive, but you look like you could be one of our college interns." "That works in my favor," Sarah said, settling into the chair across from his desk. "I want to see the program as it really is, not as it appears when everyone knows they're being watched by a senior officer." For the next hour, Rodriguez briefed her on the current training cycle. They had 3 classes in various stages of preparation. The newest group, Class 247, had just begun their initial physical conditioning phase. Class 245 was midway through Hell Week, the legendary test of mental and physical endurance. Class 243 was in advanced tactical training, preparing for their final exercises. "Where would you like to start?" Rodriguez asked. "With Class 247. I want to see the program from the beginning." Rodriguez made a phone call and arranged for Chief Petty Officer Marcus Thompson to be Sarah's initial point of contact. Thompson was a massive man who had been training SEAL candidates for 8 years. When he arrived at Rodriguez's office, his expression was politely skeptical. "Chief Thompson, this is our evaluation specialist," Rodriguez said carefully. "She'll be observing training operations for the next several months." Thompson's eyes took in Sarah's appearance with barely concealed doubt. "Ma'am, I hope you understand that our training is extremely demanding. Observers need to be able to keep up with fast-paced, physically challenging exercises. Are you sure you're prepared for that? I think I'll manage, Sarah replied mildly. As they walked toward the training areas, Thompson continued his subtle warnings about the intensity of SEAL preparation. Sarah listened patiently while mentally noting his assumptions about her capabilities. This was valuable data about the mindset of training personnel. The afternoon session with Class 247 was taking place on the beach. 32 candidates were engaged in a series of conditioning exercises under the supervision of 3 instructors. Sarah watched from a distance as the men struggled through sand runs, log carries, and surf torture sessions. The key is breaking them down mentally before we build them back up, Thompson explained, unaware that he was revealing exactly the kind of information Sarah had come to investigate. We need to see who quits when things get really hard. Sarah observed carefully as the instructors pushed the candidates to their limits. She noted which techniques were designed to test mental resilience versus those that seemed intended purely to inflict suffering. Some instructors showed genuine concern for candidate welfare, while others appeared to enjoy the power dynamic. One instructor in particular caught her attention. Petty Officer First Class Jake Morrison was leading a group of candidates through surf conditioning. His commands were sharp and demanding, but Sarah noticed that he positioned himself to spot potential safety issues. When one candidate showed signs of hypothermia, Morrison quietly rotated him out of the water while maintaining the intensity of his verbal instruction. Morrison's one of our best, Thompson said, following her gaze. Tough but fair. The candidates respect him. After the training session, Sarah spent time reviewing training records and incident reports. She was looking for patterns of injury, psychological stress, and instructor conduct that might indicate systemic problems. The paperwork revealed several concerning trends, but she needed more time to understand the full picture. That evening, Sarah checked into her temporary quarters on base. She had specifically requested accommodation in the same housing used by temporary duty personnel rather than officer quarters. This would make it easier to interact informally with training staff and support personnel. As she unpacked her belongings, Sarah reflected on her first day. The automatic assumptions about her role and capabilities had been even more pronounced than she had expected. This would work to her advantage during the evaluation, but it also highlighted some concerning attitudes within the training community. Her phone buzzed with a text from her supervisor at Naval Intelligence. How's the first day going? Any initial impressions? Sarah typed back, lots to observe. The cover identity is working perfectly. Maybe too perfectly. Over the next few weeks, Sarah established a routine that allowed her to observe different aspects of the training program. She attended instructor briefings, where she was generally ignored as just another administrative presence. She watched training exercises from various vantage points. Most importantly, she had informal conversations with support staff, medical personnel, and even some candidates during their rare downtime. The picture that emerged was complex. The SEAL training program was undeniably effective at producing elite warriors. The physical and mental challenges were necessary to prepare candidates for the realities of special operations. However, Sarah also observed concerning patterns of unnecessary psychological pressure, inconsistent safety standards, and instructor behavior that sometimes crossed professional boundaries. One morning, while observing Class 245 during their Hell Week evolution, Sarah witnessed an incident that would prove crucial to her evaluation. A candidate named Petty Officer 2nd Class David Kim was struggling with hypothermia during a nighttime surf exercise. The on-duty instructor, Petty Officer Morrison, made the decision to pull Kim from the water despite protests from another instructor who wanted to let him tough it out. We push them hard, but we don't kill them, Morrison said firmly as he wrapped Kim in a warming blanket. There's a difference between training and abuse. The exchange revealed a philosophical divide among the training staff. Some instructors understood the difference between necessary hardship and gratuitous suffering. Others seemed to believe that any accommodation for human limitations was weakness. Sarah began documenting these incidents carefully. Her evaluation would need to distinguish between essential training methods and practices that served no purpose beyond satisfying instructor egos. This was delicate work that required understanding both the military necessity of the training and the psychological impact on candidates. 3 weeks into her observation period, Sarah had her first significant interaction with the training leadership during a staff meeting. She was taking notes in the back of the room when Commander Rodriguez asked for input on a proposed change to the physical fitness standards. "What's the administrative perspective on implementing these changes?" he asked, looking directly at Sarah. For a moment, the room was silent. Sarah realized that this was her opportunity to begin revealing her actual expertise without completely abandoning her cover identity. From a documentation standpoint, she said carefully, any changes to standards should be backed by data showing they improve candidate success rates or operational readiness. Have there been studies comparing current fitness requirements to actual mission demands? The question was more sophisticated than anyone had expected from an administrative assistant. Chief Thompson looked surprised, while several instructors exchanged glances. "That's actually a very good point," Rodriguez admitted. "Do we have that kind of analysis available?" "I could research that," Sarah offered. "It might be useful to cross-reference our standards with those used by other special operations units." After the meeting, Morrison approached her with curiosity. "You seem to know quite a bit about military training for someone in administration." Sarah chose her words carefully. "I've worked with various military programs. You pick up things along the way." "What kind of programs?" "Different ones. Each has their own approaches to personnel development." It was a deliberately vague answer that seemed to satisfy Morrison's curiosity while hinting at deeper knowledge. Sarah was beginning to reveal her expertise gradually, allowing people to draw their own conclusions about her background. That afternoon brought another significant observation. Class 247 was conducting their first major team exercise, a beach reconnaissance simulation that required candidates to work together under stress. Sarah positioned herself where she could observe both the candidates and the instructors evaluating them. The exercise revealed important differences in how instructors assessed performance. Some focused on technical proficiency and teamwork. Others seemed more interested in identifying candidates they could break mentally. Sarah watched one instructor deliberately give confusing orders to create failure scenarios, then berate candidates for the resulting mistakes. "What's the purpose of that approach?" Sarah asked Chief Thompson quietly. "Some instructors believe confusion and impossible situations test mental flexibility," Thompson replied. "Others think it's just harassment. There's ongoing debate about where to draw the line." That evening, Sarah compiled her observations into a detailed report. She was beginning to see patterns that would require careful analysis. The SEAL training program contained elements of both excellent preparation for real-world challenges and questionable practices that might actually harm candidate development. Her phone rang as she was finishing her notes. The caller ID showed Commander Rodriguez. "I wanted to follow up on your question from the staff meeting," he said. "Your suggestion about comparing our standards to other units got me thinking. Do you have experience with other special operations programs?" Sarah took a deep breath. This was the moment to begin revealing more of her background. "Some experience, yes." "What kind of background do you have?" "Military psychology and special operations evaluation. I've worked with several different units over the years." There was a long pause. "Are you saying you're not just an administrative assistant?" "No, Commander. I'm not." Another pause. "I think we need to have a conversation tomorrow morning. My office, 0800. After hanging up, Sarah realized that her cover was beginning to evolve into something more complex. She was still maintaining the illusion of being lower ranking and less threatening than she actually was, but she could no longer pretend to be just an administrative worker. The next phase of her evaluation would require a different approach. That night, as she reviewed her growing file of observations, Sarah thought about the challenges ahead. She had gathered valuable information about training methods and instructor attitudes, but the most important part of her evaluation was yet to come. Soon, she would need to engage more directly with the training program and its leadership. When that happened, her true authority and expertise would become impossible to hide. The question was whether the training staff would accept her recommendations when they learned who she really was, or whether they would resist changes to a system they had invested their careers in maintaining. Sarah had seen this pattern before in other military organizations. Sometimes the biggest challenges came not from identifying problems, but from convincing people to fix them. As she prepared for sleep, Sarah reflected on the complexity of what she was trying to accomplish. SEAL training needed to be demanding enough to prepare warriors for life and death situations. But it also needed to be professional, safe, and focused on developing capability rather than satisfying instructor preferences for harsh treatment. Finding that balance would require careful navigation of military culture, institutional resistance, and the genuine dedication of people like Morrison who understood the difference between necessary hardship and pointless abuse. Sarah's evaluation would need to support the good instructors while addressing the problematic ones, all while maintaining the essential character of SEAL training. Tomorrow's conversation with Commander Rodriguez would mark a turning point in her evaluation. Sarah fell asleep knowing that the most challenging part of her assignment was about to begin. Commander Rodriguez was waiting when Sarah knocked on his office door at exactly 0800. His expression was a mixture of curiosity and concern as he gestured for her to take a seat. The morning sunlight streaming through his window highlighted the tension in his weathered features. "Before we begin," Rodriguez said, "I want you to know that I've made some calls since our conversation yesterday. Your real identity is still classified above my clearance level, which tells me this evaluation is more significant than I initially understood." Sarah nodded slowly. "What exactly did you learn?" "Not much about you specifically, but enough to know that you're not just any military psychologist. The Pentagon takes your recommendations very seriously." Rodriguez leaned back in his chair. "So let me ask directly, what are you really here to evaluate?" "Everything," Sarah said simply. "Training methods, instructor conduct, candidate preparation, safety protocols, and the overall effectiveness of the program in producing operationally ready SEALs." "And what happens if you find problems?" "That depends on what I find and how the command responds to my recommendations." Sarah met his gaze steadily. "I'm not here to shut down the program or destroy careers. I'm here to make sure SEAL training is as effective as possible while maintaining appropriate professional standards." Rodriguez was quiet for a long moment. "There have been rumors about increased scrutiny from Washington. Some of the instructors are concerned about outside interference in training that's worked for decades." "Change is always difficult," Sarah acknowledged. "But military training has to evolve to meet new challenges. The question is whether that evolution happens proactively or in response to problems that could have been prevented." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock on the door. Chief Thompson entered, his expression more serious than Sarah had seen before. "Commander, we have a situation with Class 245. One of the candidates was hospitalized last night after Hell Week exercises." Sarah felt her attention sharpen. Medical emergencies during SEAL training were not uncommon, but the timing of this incident would make it particularly significant for her evaluation. "What happened?" Rodriguez asked. "Petty Officer Martinez collapsed during night operations. He's stable now, but the doctors are concerned about possible rhabdomyolysis." Thompson glanced at Sarah uncertainly. "Should we discuss this privately?" "She's cleared for this information," Rodriguez said. "In fact, she needs to be involved in our response." Thompson's confusion was evident, but he continued his report. The incident occurred during the log PT evolution. Martinez had been struggling throughout the week but refused to drop. The on-duty instructor was Petty Officer Jackson. Sarah knew Jackson from her observations. He was one of the instructors who believed in maximum psychological pressure and had little patience for what he considered weakness. She had documented several concerning incidents involving his training methods. "I need to interview Martinez when he's medically cleared," Sarah said. "I also want to review the complete timeline of events leading up to his collapse." "You want to interview a candidate?" Thompson looked shocked. "Ma'am, with respect, that's not typical procedure for administrative personnel." Rodriguez intervened. "Chief, I think it's time you understood that our observer has broader authority than we initially realized. She's conducting a comprehensive evaluation of our training program for Naval Special Warfare Command." The revelation hit Thompson like a physical blow. Sarah watched his expression change from confusion to understanding to embarrassment as he realized how he had been treating someone with significant authority over his program. "Ma'am, I apologize for any inappropriate comments or assumptions," Thompson stammered. "If I had known." "You treated me exactly as I wanted to be treated," Sarah said firmly. "That allowed me to observe the program without artificial modifications in behavior. Your natural reactions gave me valuable information." Over the following days, Sarah's role began to shift more overtly toward active evaluation. She interviewed Martinez once he was released from the hospital and learned that he had been experiencing symptoms of severe muscle breakdown for 2 days before his collapse. Jackson had dismissed his concerns and accused him of malingering. "I knew something was wrong," Martinez told her during their private conversation. But Petty Officer Jackson said that complaining about pain was what quitters do. He made it clear that seeking medical attention would be seen as failure. This was exactly the kind of problematic attitude Sarah had come to investigate. The line between mental toughness and medical neglect was being crossed by instructors who couldn't distinguish between necessary hardship and dangerous ignorance of health issues. Sarah's interview with Jackson was more confrontational. The instructor was defensive about his training methods and resentful of outside scrutiny. "These candidates need to learn that discomfort and pain are part of the job," Jackson insisted. "If we coddle them during training, they'll fold under real operational stress." "There's a difference between discomfort and medical emergency," Sarah replied. "Martinez's condition could have caused permanent kidney damage or worse. How does that serve operational readiness? With respect, ma'am, you don't understand the realities of what we're preparing these men for. Combat doesn't stop because someone feels bad." Sarah fixed him with a steady look. "Petty Officer Jackson, how many combat deployments have you completed?" Jackson's confidence wavered slightly. "2 tours, ma'am." "In what capacity?" "Ship security and port operations." Sarah nodded. "I see. For your information, I've completed 3 deployments in direct combat roles and have extensive experience with special operations training programs. I understand exactly what we're preparing candidates for." The room fell silent. Jackson's assumption that Sarah lacked relevant experience had just been thoroughly demolished. She continued in a calm but firm voice. "Effective training builds resilience and capability. Reckless disregard for health and safety builds nothing except liability. A SEAL who ignores serious medical conditions isn't mentally tough, he's a danger to his team." After Jackson left, Sarah spent time reviewing medical records and incident reports. The pattern was clear: instructors like Jackson were creating unnecessary risks while instructors like Morrison maintained high standards without compromising safety. The difference came down to professional judgment and genuine understanding of training objectives. That afternoon brought another significant development. Sarah was observing Class 243's advanced tactical exercise when she noticed several candidates demonstrating techniques that were outdated or potentially dangerous. When she questioned the lead instructor about the training methods, she learned that the curriculum hadn't been updated in over 5 years. "We used the techniques that worked for us when we went through training," the instructor explained. "Why change something that produces good SEALs?" Sarah realized that this represented another systemic issue. SEAL training was evolving too slowly to keep pace with changes in tactics, technology, and understanding of human performance. Some instructors were teaching methods that had been superseded by better approaches developed through recent operational experience. She began conducting informal interviews with recent SEAL graduates who had returned from deployments. These conversations revealed gaps between training content and operational reality that needed to be addressed. Petty Officer Morrison proved to be particularly insightful during these discussions. Unlike some instructors who were resistant to change, he was actively interested in improving training effectiveness. "I've been saying for months that we need to update our medical training component," Morrison told her during a conversation after evening training. "The field medicine techniques we're teaching are from 10 years ago. I've learned better methods during my deployments, but there's no formal process for incorporating that knowledge into the curriculum." Sarah made detailed notes about these observations. Her evaluation was revealing that the SEAL training program needed both philosophical changes in instructor attitudes and practical updates to training content. Both issues would require careful handling to implement successfully. 3 weeks after her conversation with Rodriguez, Sarah received orders to brief the command staff on her preliminary findings. This would be her first formal presentation to the training leadership, and she knew it would determine how receptive they would be to her final recommendations. The briefing took place in the main conference room with all senior training personnel present. Sarah had prepared carefully, organizing her findings into categories that emphasized operational effectiveness rather than just criticism of current methods. "My evaluation has identified 3 primary areas for improvement," she began. First, inconsistency in instructor training and standards. Second, outdated curriculum content in several subject areas. Third, insufficient integration of recent operational lessons learned. She presented specific examples without naming individual instructors, focusing on patterns rather than personal criticisms. The audience was attentive but clearly defensive about their program. "These issues are affecting training outcomes," Sarah continued. "Candidates are graduating without some skills they need for current operational environments, while spending time on techniques that are no longer relevant." Commander Rodriguez asked the obvious question, "What are you recommending we do about these problems?" Sarah had anticipated this moment carefully. Her recommendations needed to be practical and acceptable to the training staff, or they would be ignored regardless of their merit. "I recommend a 3-phase improvement process," she said. Phase 1 focuses on instructor standardization through updated training and clear performance guidelines. Phase 2 involves curriculum review and modernization. Phase 3 establishes a formal process for incorporating operational lessons learned into training content. The questions that followed were pointed but professional. Sarah could see that some instructors, particularly Morrison and his peers, were genuinely interested in improving their program. Others remained skeptical about outside interference in their established methods. Chief Thompson raised a concern that Sarah knew represented broader resistance. "Ma'am, this program has produced thousands of successful SEALs over decades. Are we really sure that major changes are necessary?" Sarah had prepared for this question. "Chief, the program's success rate is impressive, and I'm not suggesting we abandon proven methods. But consider this: if we can maintain that success rate while reducing unnecessary injuries, improving candidate preparation for current threats, and creating more consistent training standards, wouldn't that be worth pursuing?" The logic was difficult to argue against, but Sarah could see that emotional resistance remained. Change was threatening to people who had invested their careers in the current system. After the briefing, Morrison approached her privately. "Ma'am, I want you to know that some of us have been pushing for exactly these kinds of changes for years. We just didn't have the authority to make them happen. What kind of resistance have you encountered?" Sarah asked. "Mainly from instructors who think any change means we're going soft. They confuse tradition with effectiveness." Morrison glanced around to make sure they weren't being overheard. "There's also concern about criticism from former SEALs who went through the old training. Some people worry that changes might be seen as admitting the program was flawed." Sarah understood this dynamic from previous evaluations. Military organizations often struggled with the balance between honoring tradition and adapting to new realities. The key was framing changes as evolution rather than repudiation of past methods. That evening, Sarah received a call from her supervisor at Naval Intelligence. Admiral Rebecca Foster had been monitoring the evaluation progress and wanted a personal update on Sarah's findings. "How are they receiving your recommendations?" Foster asked. "Mixed reactions, as expected. Some instructors are eager for modernization. Others see any changes as criticism of their methods. Sarah summarized the key resistance points she had encountered. That's typical for institutional evaluations. The question is whether the command leadership will support implementation of your recommendations. Commander Rodriguez seems supportive, but he's caught between pressure from above for improvements and resistance from below to change. He'll need clear direction from higher authority to overcome instructor resistance. Foster was quiet for a moment. Sarah, I want you to know that your evaluation has already generated significant interest at the Pentagon. There's recognition that SEAL training needs to evolve, but also concern about maintaining program effectiveness. What's the timeline for implementation decisions? That depends partly on your final report and partly on external factors. There's growing pressure for special operations training reform across all services. Your SEAL evaluation is being watched as a potential model for other programs. After the call, Sarah realized that her evaluation carried implications beyond just the SEAL training program. Her recommendations could influence special operations training throughout the military. This added pressure to ensure her findings were thorough, accurate, and practical. The following weeks brought several incidents that reinforced Sarah's observations about inconsistent standards. A candidate suffered a preventable injury during weapons training because an instructor failed to follow established safety protocols. Another candidate was subjected to harassment that crossed professional boundaries during psychological stress testing. Each incident provided additional evidence for Sarah's recommendations while highlighting the need for immediate changes rather than gradual reform. The current system was producing problems that could escalate into larger controversies if left unaddressed. Sarah also spent time observing successful training evolutions that demonstrated what the program could accomplish under proper leadership. Morrison's advanced tactical sessions were particularly impressive, combining challenging scenarios with appropriate safety measures and constructive feedback. This is what right looks like, Sarah wrote in her notes after observing Morrison's team exercise. High standards maintained through professional competence rather than arbitrary harshness. As her evaluation period entered its final month, Sarah began preparing her comprehensive report. The document would need to balance criticism of current problems with recognition of the program's strengths, while providing specific, actionable recommendations for improvement. The challenge was creating a report that would generate necessary changes without triggering defensive resistance from the training community. Sarah had learned that successful institutional reform required careful attention to both substance and presentation. Her final interviews with command staff revealed the complexity of implementing changes in a military training environment. Everyone agreed that improvements were desirable, but there was less consensus about specific methods or timelines. Change is easy to recommend but hard to execute, Rodriguez told her during one of their final planning sessions. I need recommendations that my instructors can actually implement without compromising training effectiveness. Sarah understood that her evaluation's success would ultimately be measured not by the quality of her analysis, but by the practical improvements that resulted from her recommendations. The real test of her work was yet to come. The incident that would define the final phase of Sarah's evaluation occurred on a Tuesday morning during Class 245's final tactical exercise. She was observing from the command post when urgent radio chatter indicated a serious problem during the beach assault simulation. "Control, we have a candidate down with possible spinal injury," came the tense voice of Petty Officer Morrison, who was leading the exercise. Requesting immediate medical evacuation. Sarah watched the response unfold with professional intensity. The way the training staff handled this emergency would reveal everything about their priorities and competence under real pressure. Within minutes, medical personnel were racing toward the beach while backup instructors moved to secure the training area. The injured candidate was Petty Officer First Class James Wilson, one of the strongest performers in his class. During a simulated building clearing exercise, Wilson had fallen through a weakened floor section that should have been identified and reinforced before the training began. Sarah accompanied the medical team to the scene and immediately began documenting what she observed. The building used for the exercise was a condemned structure that had been modified for training purposes, but recent inspection records showed concerning gaps in safety assessments. "How long has this building been in use for training?" Sarah asked the lead instructor as Wilson was carefully loaded onto a stretcher. About 3 years, Petty Officer Jackson replied, his earlier hostility towards Sarah replaced by obvious concern about the situation. We've used it dozens of times without problems. Sarah made detailed notes about the scene while staying out of the way of medical personnel. Wilson was conscious and responsive, which was encouraging, but the potential for serious spinal injury made the situation extremely serious. At the hospital, Sarah waited with Commander Rodriguez as doctors evaluated Wilson's condition. The preliminary assessment was cautiously optimistic. Initial scans showed no obvious spinal damage, but Wilson would require extensive testing to rule out more subtle injuries. This is exactly the kind of incident that could shut down our program, Rodriguez said quietly as they sat in the waiting area. If Wilson is permanently injured because of inadequate safety measures, let's focus on getting him the best possible care first, Sarah replied. Then, we can address systemic issues. But Sarah was already thinking about the broader implications. This accident highlighted several problems she had identified during her evaluation: inadequate facility maintenance, insufficient safety inspections, and a culture that sometimes prioritized training realism over appropriate risk management. Over the next 48 hours, as Wilson's condition stabilized and doctors confirmed that he had avoided serious injury, Sarah conducted a thorough investigation of the incident. Her findings were troubling but not surprising. The building inspection records revealed that safety assessments had been cursory and incomplete. The floor section that had collapsed had been weakened by water damage that was visible but had not been properly evaluated or repaired. Multiple instructors had noticed the problem but had not reported it through proper channels. We mentioned it to the facilities people several times, one instructor told Sarah during her investigation. But nothing ever got fixed, so we just worked around it. This revealed another systemic issue: inadequate communication and follow-through on safety concerns. The training staff lacked confidence in the bureaucratic processes designed to address facility problems, so they had developed workarounds that sometimes created new risks. Sarah's investigation also uncovered positive aspects of the response. Morrison's quick action and professional emergency procedures had likely prevented Wilson's injury from becoming much worse. The medical response had been fast and competent. Several instructors had shown genuine concern for Wilson's welfare rather than just worry about program implications. 3 days after Wilson's accident, Sarah received orders to brief senior Naval Special Warfare leadership on her preliminary findings and immediate recommendations. The briefing would take place at the Pentagon, indicating the high-level attention her evaluation had generated. Admiral Jennifer Hayes, commander of Naval Special Warfare Command, opened the briefing with characteristic directness. Commander Chen, your evaluation has occurred during a period of increased scrutiny of special operations training across all services. We need your honest assessment of what needs to change and how quickly we can implement improvements. Sarah had prepared extensively for this moment. Her presentation would need to balance criticism of current problems with practical solutions that could be implemented without compromising training effectiveness. Admiral, my evaluation has identified 3 categories of issues, Sarah began. Immediate safety concerns that require urgent attention, training method inconsistencies that affect program quality, and systemic problems that will require longer-term reform. She presented Wilson's accident as an example of how seemingly minor problems could escalate into serious incidents. The failure to properly maintain training facilities reflected broader issues with resource allocation and safety culture that needed immediate attention. What are your specific recommendations? Admiral Hayes asked. Sarah outlined a comprehensive reform plan that addressed both immediate and long-term needs. Immediate actions included facility safety assessments, instructor retraining on safety protocols, and establishment of clear reporting procedures for hazard identification. Longer-term changes involved curriculum updates, instructor standardization programs, and formal integration of operational lessons learned. How long will these reforms take to implement? Asked Captain Robert Sullivan, the Admiral's Chief of Staff. The immediate safety measures can be implemented within 30 days, Sarah replied. Training standardization will require 3 to 6 months. Comprehensive curriculum reform will take 12 to 18 months if properly resourced and managed. Admiral Hayes asked the crucial question: what resistance should we expect from the training community? Sarah had given this considerable thought. Resistance will come primarily from instructors who view any changes as criticism of their methods. However, I've also identified significant support for modernization among instructors who want to improve program effectiveness. She mentioned Morrison and his peers as examples of training staff who are eager for positive changes. The key is framing reforms as evolution rather than repudiation of traditional methods. We're building on proven foundations, not abandoning them. The briefing continued for 2 hours, covering implementation strategies, resource requirements, and potential challenges. Sarah's recommendations received serious consideration, but she could see that political and budgetary constraints would influence which changes could be implemented immediately. After the briefing, Admiral Hayes asked Sarah to remain for a private conversation. "Commander, I want your personal assessment of whether these reforms are absolutely necessary or just desirable improvements." Sarah chose her words carefully. "Admiral, the SEAL training program is fundamentally sound and has produced excellent results for decades. However, it contains preventable risks and outdated methods that compromise its effectiveness and create unnecessary vulnerabilities." "Are you saying the program is broken?" "No, ma'am. I'm saying it needs systematic maintenance and upgrading, like any complex system. The alternative is allowing small problems to become bigger ones until external pressure forces more dramatic changes." Admiral Hayes nodded. "That's exactly what I needed to hear. I'd rather implement controlled improvements now than emergency reforms later." Sarah returned to Coronado with authorization to begin immediate implementation of her priority recommendations. The next phase of her assignment would involve working with the training staff to execute approved changes while completing her comprehensive evaluation report. The response from training personnel was mixed but generally more positive than Sarah had expected. Morrison and his allies were enthusiastic about the modernization efforts. Even some initially resistant instructors began showing interest when they realized that the reforms were designed to improve rather than restrict their training methods. Chief Thompson proved to be particularly valuable in bridging the gap between Sarah's recommendations and practical implementation. His initial embarrassment about misjudging her authority had evolved into genuine respect for her expertise and commitment to program improvement. "Ma'am, I have to admit that some of these changes are long overdue," Thompson told her during a planning session for instructor retraining. "I was so focused on defending our traditions that I wasn't seeing opportunities for legitimate improvements." Sarah appreciated Thompson's honesty and made sure to involve him heavily in implementation planning. His credibility with other instructors would be crucial for successful reform execution. The facility safety assessment revealed problems beyond just the building where Wilson was injured. Several training areas had maintenance issues that posed potential risks to candidates and instructors. Sarah worked with base facilities personnel to prioritize repairs and establish regular inspection schedules. Instructor retraining began with a focus on safety protocols and consistent application of training standards. Sarah designed the program to emphasize professional development rather than remedial correction, which helped reduce resistance and increase participation. The curriculum review process was more complex and politically sensitive. Sarah had to balance the need for modernization with respect for training methods that had proven effective over time. She worked closely with recently returned SEALs to identify which techniques needed updating and which traditional methods should be preserved. One significant change involved the integration of current medical knowledge into training protocols. The understanding of exercise physiology, injury prevention, and performance optimization had advanced considerably since many training methods were first developed. "We can maintain the same level of physical and mental challenge while reducing unnecessary injury risks," Sarah explained to skeptical instructors. Better training science doesn't mean easier training, it means more effective training. The psychological aspects of training also received attention in Sarah's reform program. She introduced more sophisticated stress inoculation techniques that prepared candidates for operational realities without resorting to arbitrary harassment or abuse. Petty Officer Jackson, who had initially been most resistant to changes, gradually became more receptive as he saw that reforms could enhance rather than diminish his effectiveness as an instructor. Sarah made sure to involve resistant instructors in the implementation process, giving them opportunities to contribute to solutions rather than just comply with mandates. 6 weeks after Wilson's accident, Sarah received word that he would make a full recovery and had requested to return to training. His positive attitude and determination to complete the program provided powerful validation for the safety improvements that had been implemented. Wilson's accident could have ended his career or worse, Rodriguez observed during a progress review meeting. The fact that he's coming back stronger shows that proper safety measures don't compromise the warrior spirit we're trying to develop. Sarah's comprehensive evaluation report was completed after 5 months of intensive observation and analysis. The document outlines systematic improvements while acknowledging the fundamental strengths of the SEAL training program. The report's recommendations were grouped into 3 implementation phases. Phase 1 addressed immediate safety and standardization issues that could be completed within 6 months. Phase 2 involved curriculum modernization that would require 12 to 18 months. Phase 3 established ongoing processes for continuous improvement based on operational feedback. The goal is creating a training program that maintains its legendary effectiveness while adapting to evolving operational requirements, Sarah wrote in her executive summary. These recommendations will enhance rather than replace the proven methods that have produced elite warriors for decades. The formal presentation of Sarah's final report took place at Naval Special Warfare Command Headquarters with full senior leadership attendance. Admiral Hayes introduced Sarah with comments that revealed how significantly her evaluation had influenced policy discussions. Commander Chen's work has provided us with a roadmap for evolutionary improvements that will ensure SEAL training remains the gold standard for special operations preparation, the Admiral said. Her recommendations are being incorporated into our long-term development strategy. Sarah's presentation focused on the positive outcomes that could be achieved through systematic implementation of her recommendations. She emphasized success stories from the initial reform phases and projected benefits for both training effectiveness and candidate safety. The questions following her presentation were substantive and forward-looking rather than defensive. The training leadership had clearly accepted the need for evolution and was focused on successful implementation rather than resistance to change. After the formal briefing, Sarah spent her final weeks at Coronado working with individual instructors and training teams to ensure smooth transitions to new methods. She made sure that changes were being implemented as intended rather than just nominally adopted. Morrison had emerged as a key leader in the reform process, and Sarah worked extensively with him to develop training materials and procedures that other instructors could follow. His combination of operational credibility and teaching ability made him an ideal advocate for the improvements. The best part about these changes is that they're making us better at what we've always tried to do, Morrison told Sarah during one of their final working sessions. We're still producing warriors, but now we're being smarter about how we do it. Sarah's last official act at the training facility was conducting exit interviews with candidates from all 3 classes she had observed. Their feedback provided valuable validation for the reforms and insights for future improvements. The candidates consistently reported that recent changes had improved their training experience without reducing its intensity or value. They felt better prepared for operational challenges and more confident in their abilities. The training is still incredibly demanding, one candidate told her, but now it feels like every challenge has a purpose. Before, some exercises seemed designed just to make us suffer. As Sarah prepared to leave Coronado, she reflected on the transformation that had occurred during her evaluation. The SEAL training program was evolving from a system that relied on tradition and individual instructor preferences to one that combined proven methods with modern training science and systematic quality control. The changes weren't revolutionary, they were evolutionary improvements that enhanced existing strengths while addressing identified weaknesses. Most importantly, the reforms had been implemented with the support rather than resistance of the training staff. Commander Rodriguez hosted a farewell gathering for Sarah that included instructors and support staff who had worked with her during the evaluation. The atmosphere was markedly different from her arrival 6 months earlier, when she had been dismissed as an administrative assistant. When you first arrived, I thought we were being subjected to another bureaucratic review that would produce recommendations we'd ignore, Rodriguez admitted during his remarks. Instead, you've helped us become better at our mission while maintaining everything that makes SEAL training special. Admiral Hayes called Sarah personally to discuss her next assignment and the long-term implications of her SEAL evaluation. Your work at Coronado is being studied as a model for training reform across special operations, the Admiral said. We want you to lead similar evaluations for other programs that could benefit from your approach. Sarah accepted the new assignment with satisfaction and anticipation. Her experience with SEAL training had demonstrated that even the most traditional military programs could evolve and improve when changes were properly designed and implemented. The final validation of her work came 6 months later when Sarah received an update from Morrison about the continued progress of training reforms. Candidate success rates had improved, serious injuries had decreased, and instructor job satisfaction had increased significantly. The program is stronger than it's ever been, Morrison wrote in his report. We're producing better SEALs while maintaining the standards that have always defined our training. You showed us that evolution and tradition could work together rather than against each other. Sarah filed Morrison's report with satisfaction, knowing that her evaluation had achieved its primary objective. The SEAL training program would continue producing elite warriors, but now it would do so more safely, efficiently, and effectively than before. Her success at Coronado had also established her reputation as someone who could navigate complex military cultures while implementing necessary changes. The combination of expertise, persistence, and respect for tradition that had made her SEAL evaluation successful would serve her well in future assignments. Looking back on her 6 months at the training facility, Sarah realized that the most important lesson had been about the power of gradual revelation. By allowing people to discover her capabilities and authority slowly, she had been able to observe authentic behavior and build genuine relationships that made reform possible. The young woman in civilian clothes who had been dismissed as a trainee on her first day had ultimately demonstrated that authority came not from rank or position, but from expertise, integrity, and the ability to help others become better at their mission. That was a lesson that would guide Sarah through whatever challenges awaited her in future evaluations.